Hi guys, welcome back to Reserved Investments on YouTube. So I'm getting asked a lot of questions in regards to video game collecting, modern video game collecting, and also the market as a whole. One such question that I keep getting asked over and over again is, do I think the video game market, or more specifically, the modern era video game marketplace, could ever experience another crash like it did back in 1982 and 1983. To answer this question, we have to look at in depth what happened in regards to the overall video game market back in 1982, and then see if there's any parallels to what has and is occurring today in 2019 on the eve of the year 2020. Now, there's a lot of YouTubers and even a lot of people in the video game collecting field that get what transpired back in 1982 and 1983 wrong, to the point that it's not that they should know better, but I don't think they're looking at the market from somebody looking outside of the video game collecting hobby, looking in. In other words, they're using their own biased opinion and perspective to taint what actually occurred back in 1982 and 1983 that caused the market to sour and consumers to turn on the home video game collecting marketplace. So before we begin, I want to get rid of some of the myths out there. One of the things that you got to understand, back in 1982 and 1983, we were still dealing with crude technology in regards to graphical and sound capabilities for home video game systems. It is not anywhere near like it is today, where you can plug in a game like BioShock or Gears of War or Halo or Uncharted or even Super Mario Bros. Deluxe for the Nintendo Switch and have a full, colorful 3D world open up in front of you where you can recognize the characters that you're interacting with and also the lush, realistic 3D environments that are in place. Back in 1982 and 1983, a lot of the games were very crude. Most of the games also played in a similar manner. Now, I know what you're going to say, Sean, there is a big difference between playing a game like Asteroids versus Missile Command versus Pitfall versus Combat. I agree with you. But those games, why gameplay addictive they were not overtly difficult or complex or overtly engrossing like something that we have on the market today. Why is this important? Because you have to understand, back in 1982 and 1983, and even before that particular time frame, meaning from the late 1970s on up, if you wanted to play a game in its original form, you pretty much went to an arcade. An arcade is where you played a lot of these games that were being released and known as state-of-the-art. Well, here's the thing, guys. If you waited for the home console version, back for a game like Missile Command or Pac-Man or Burger Time, chances are when you bought that game at a retail store and you took it home and you played it, if you played that game in an arcade already, you were disappointed with the home version because it could not graphically compare to the arcade experience. So what a lot of people get wrong about the video game crash of the early 1980s is that arcades were still flourishing at the time. Even when the market for Atari, Intellivision, ColecoVision, Vectrex, all those systems imploded, and they were being cleared out of stores for $9.99 a game or 99 cents a game and $19.99 a system, where if you would have went back and bought them all and kept them all factory sealed, you would have something of value today. We're not going to talk about that in this video, but I just want to plant that seed in your mind. Well, you got to understand, when that was occurring, people were still going to arcades for entertainment. In fact, arcades at the time were bringing in massive amounts of money still. Arcades were making a ton of money. Another aspect that a lot of people who comment on the great crash of the 1980s miss is the fact that home computer gaming was still predominantly popular. When the 1980 crash occurred, it took out a lot of the video game consoles that were on the market at that time. It did not affect sales of IBM MS-DOS computers. Even Atari computers were really not affected by the crash as much as people claim. They were affected by what was going on in the computer marketplace in regards to more powerful machines being released by Apple and IBM competitors, because Atari and Commodore were starting to get left in the proverbial dust. The market, especially with the advent of Microsoft coming on the scene and being able to establish Windows as a predominant platform along with MS-DOS, Microsoft was pretty much giving a lot of firepower to IBM and IBM-compatible machines, while Apple was busy doing their own thing, trying to keep up. Well, if you look back and you analyze the market as a whole during this point, a lot of the companies that could afford to produce games for computers were already doing so. So all is what they did, companies like Interplay, Activision, Electronic Arts, a lot of these well-known software companies, even Ocean at this particular time, which in my opinion is really a third-tier, third-party publisher of games, they all converted to creating games for the Apple line of computers, IBM DOS line computers, Commodore, Amiga, a lot of these other computer systems that they were already developing for. So as long as you weren't a video game company that was completely dependent on the home video game market, you were able to survive in this environment. Now, to be fair, there were a lot of great companies that went under. I mean, let's be honest. Let's look at Imagic. Imagic released incredible games like Alanis and Demon Attack and some more obscure games that if you go back and you start playing Atari 2600 games again, you're going to come across a bunch of gems that that company produced. Well, you have to analyze it from the perspective that, unfortunately for Imagic, they put all their eggs in one basket. They were producing games pretty much solely for video game consoles. So when the market dried up due to a bunch of low-quality games hitting the market and consumers tiring on them, which I am simplifying that a little bit, guys. I'm going to get more in depth on that in a minute. You have to realize that a company like Imagic couldn't have the capital to convert a lot of their games to PC gaming titles to survive and sustain the market dynamics that were changing at the time. Now, another thing you have to look at is consumers were going to the arcade and playing Pac-Man, Asteroids, Missile Command, Breakout, Burger Time, all these incredible games that they had in their mind as being arcade-perfect games. Well, when they went to the store and they bought Pac-Man for the Atari 2600, plugged it in and played it, they were like, well, dude, I just paid $40 for this game, and it's nothing like the arcade version. So you have to look at the dynamics as to what was happening in the market as a whole to understand what caused the 1982 and 1983 video game crash and how Nintendo was able to come along just literally 2 or 3 years later and ignite the market again. Now, another thing that we got to look at when we talk about the home video game market as it was back in the early 1980s is the fact that it was also new. Consumers had never seen anything like it before. So it was only a matter of time before consumers would switch gears and start to go out and branch off into other interests. This is important because this happens in collecting categories too. There's a lot of collecting categories that hit the scene that either start off strong or start off weak in demand, and then some of the categories that start off weak in demand end up very strong, and some of the categories that start off very strong because they're speculative, they start to weaken in demand over time. So consumer markets, whether we're talking about toys, games, video games, collectible card games, what have you. Those markets work the same way as collecting markets. So you can study different segments of toy collecting or even modern era mass-produced toys and games, and you can analyze those particular markets just like you do with collecting categories. And ironically, there's a lot of similarities in those particular markets. What differentiates them is whether or not something becomes collectible over the long term and whether a lot of people gravitate towards wanting to buy those particular items on the secondary market and at what price they're paying for them. That's what's important. Now, going back to this example, when we look at the video game market today, video games, home video games specifically, are not dependent on what is happening in arcades, and they're also not dependent on what is happening with home computers. Now, it is still true in 2019, on the eve of 2020 here, that video game systems predominantly are less powerful on average than most state-of-the-art, cutting-edge computer systems being released on the market today. For instance, a PlayStation 4 that came out, 3, 4, or 5 years ago is not going to be as powerful as a just released state-of-the-art PC system with a high-end graphics card. It's just not going to happen. That said, though, you have to look at it from this perspective. A lot of the systems that are going to be coming up out of the market in the next several years are going to most likely be all digital. They're not going to have a physical media drive anymore. So this brings me to my next point. There's a lot of people asking me, Sean, if they start doing systems that have no physical drive, where everything's all digital, this is going to cause a lot of people to shy away from video games, and it's going to usher in a second market crash where nobody is going to want to buy these items. Well, you got to look at it more in depth than that, because I think that's an oversimplistic analysis of the market as a whole and where we are today. You have to understand, guys, I'm going to throw a statistic out there that's going to surprise you. Digital video game purchases are on track to outpace physical game purchases over and over again for the next coming years. So what that means is more consumers out there are more comfortable downloading a lot of these games than they are going to a store or logging on to Amazon and buying a physical copy. I guarantee you, when Sony, Nintendo, and Microsoft look at their sales figures, one of the things that they're looking at is how much a physical copy costs to produce and market versus how much it's sold in regards or relation to the digital version. Microsoft is currently seeing a trend where a lot of people that own Microsoft consoles, more so than Sony or Nintendo, are more comfortable downloading games than they are buying physical versions of those games on retail shelves. Now, why that is, I don't know. The only analysis or perspective I can give you on that is I think that a lot of consumers who covet the Xbox brand are also computer gamers who are exposed to Windows, MS-DOS operating systems that Microsoft produced, as well as a lot of Microsoft gaming franchises before buying their coveted Xbox One or Xbox 360 video game system. So what's happening is those consumers seem to be more content with downloading Halo 5 on a system rather than going to the store and buying a physical copy. Now, when we look at PlayStation and Nintendo enthusiasts, there still is a lot of pushback against any type of all physical media being completely made obsolete. In other words, Nintendo's doing a good job by releasing these flash-in-the-pan collectible editions that sell out upon release and also add a lot of money to the company's bottom line. And if you know anything about Nintendo, they're a publicly traded company. They have shareholders who want to see repeated growth year after year. That's why, if you guys remember, a couple of years back when the Wii U was struggling on the market, there was a lot of analysts in the trade claiming that Nintendo was dead. Nintendo cannot produce a winning product for the life of them. Then, in 2015, Pokemon Go hit, and it reignited a lot of interest in Nintendo's stock price and also their business, to the point where they were able to use that momentum and introduce the Nintendo Switch, which just seems to have caught on with the overall gaming public. Now, what does all this mean? Well, when we look at what's coming down the pike, we have Xbox Scarlet over here, and we have the PlayStation 5, as it's probably going to be called, because Sony has already released details on this particular system. And one of the things that Sony did in a surprising move was they said, we want to assure our fans and our consumers that the Sony PlayStation 5 is going to have a physical media drive, meaning it's most likely going to play Blu-ray, discs, and games in regards to our particular games and software being released for this system. And it's also going to be, in some way, backwards compatible with the PlayStation 4 system and games. So this was seen as very good news to most video game collectors and enthusiasts who don't have to worry that the next generation is going to become all digital anytime soon. Now, Microsoft has gotten a little bit dicey in their response and how they're setting up the Xbox Scarlet, meaning their next generation video game system, to be. There's a lot of talk as to how the system is most likely going to have a physical media drive, much to the chagrin of Microsoft executives, because Microsoft is doing their best to get rid of physical media. We see this with the launch of the all-digital Xbox One S video game system that just came out. Well, there's a lot of people that are buying that particular system, and they are choosing to forgo physical media in lieu of digital media. Now, Nintendo is kind of in the middle, where if you look at what their new CEO has said on the matter, there is going to come a point where he does want to push an all-digital future. That's coming on the horizon, guys. You cannot ignore this. That said, do I think that any of these developments are going to usher in an era of a video game crash or a market correction like we saw back in 1982 and 1983? The answer, for those of you that want the cliff notes of this video almost 18 minutes in, is no. And here's the reason why. Consumers in 2019, on the eve of the year 2020, are more accepting of an all-digital future. We see this with the success of Steam and other platforms that have come out, most notably in regards to the quote-unquote eShops that are being released for the PlayStation console, the Xbox One console, and the Nintendo Switch at present time. A lot of the software that is sold through those eShops is being consumed in mass, and a lot of companies are benefiting financially from the downloads and the revenues that they're generating off the sale of those particular games and items. Now, I know what some of you are going to say. Well, Sean, if the market goes all digital, how does limited run games fit into this? Well, that's going to be something that limited run games is going to have to deal with at that set time. One of the things, and I want to put this in your mind, one of the reasons why I think limited run games is going after releasing vintage Nintendo Star Wars games or a lot of these other PC games that they're coming out with at present time is because I think that they know eventually the whole video game marketplace is going to go all digital, and we're going to have to find a way to survive. And I have not had any conversations with the owners of limited run games. I've talked about my interest in their product, where I think that they make a great product. I think, unfortunately, though, a lot of speculators have come in to that particular subset of the market and tried to corner that particular market for their own financial benefit, as to which I caution people from doing, because just because something has the word limited in its title, even if it is a limited release, You have to understand there's a difference between an organic collectible and something that is manufactured to be scarce. And that's what a lot of these speculators don't understand, which is one of the reasons why I started this channel. But going back to the topic of will there be a video game crash going forward, the answer is, in my opinion, no. There's not a chance of that happening. The market will transition. The market will go through a transition. But overall, your average video game enthusiast is not going to care whether or not their game is in physical form or digital form. A collector will. A speculator will. Somebody who wants to buy up these items for possible long-term or short-term gain will. But overall, the average video game enthusiast isn't going to care. So this is food for thought, and I value your opinion. If you like this video, let me know. If you have any thoughts to add so that I can do a follow-up video to this topic, please leave a comment in the comment section below, and I will be sure to either respond and or review those comments and possibly do a follow-up video to this particular topic. To all the people who have subscribed to this channel, I really thank you. I value your support, and I hope that if you are watching this for the first time and you're a new viewer to this channel, you will consider subscribing to this channel and joining me on this quest in which we analyze a lot of the popular antique and collecting categories out in the greater antiques and collectibles trade today. Thank you and good night.